Hey everybody, Operation Z here, and we're continuing with the story of Abraham, part 14. And we're picking up where we left off, where it talks about pretty much the covenant that God had with Abraham and what he's going to do with Ishmael to make him a great nation as well. But the promise is going to be through their son Isaac. Goes over how Isaac means laughter and all these things that because Abraham laughed, and as we'll see here in a little bit, something else happens with it too. So it's a significant thing that God named Isaac, which means laughter in the Hebrew tongue. So we're going to pick up where we left off there. And give me one moment here. Dropping stuff. Okay. All right, so the story of Abraham, part 14, here in Genesis chapter 18, verse 1. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. So we can only imagine what it must have been like for Abraham, by the way, back in that time where he was there in the east, in the land of Canaan and Haran and just all these areas that he was in. It was a very harsh, hot climate that, the heat of the day, it was just very hot. And in that type of climate, they always had to worry about famines being right around the corner and drought and all those things, and worrying how the crops would do, and not only that, but how the livestock would do as well. So they endured these conditions, and they just did what they could with their situation. So Genesis 18 verse 2, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him, and when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground. So what we see here is these 3 men come to meet him, and we see Abraham's reaction right away, that he's seeing something that is astounding, that he just knows that it's not the norm, that there's something with this encounter, that he gets up and rushes to them where they are, and he bows himself to them. So he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him, and when he saw them, he ran to meet him from the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground. So yeah, we see that basically we can tell from the text that there's something different about them, that when he sees them, he just knows that it's a divine presence, and that it's as the presence of God that he rushes and comes to meet these 3 men here. So Genesis chapter 18 verse 3, and said, My Lord, if I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. So we see his humility, that he said, please don't pass from thy servant. He acknowledges him as his servant and as his worshiper, and he says, My Lord, if I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. So we see that, he shows that reverence to God, and just that humility, knowing that it's God, the Most High God, the creator of heaven and earth, and the possessor of the heavens and the earth. And, we see his reverence and his praise, and that he just wants him to be there to tarry, so to speak, with him, and just stay there and be there, and just, he's awestruck because his God came in person to see him. And it was just an incredible feat for him to see this. And it was, like his reaction was just pretty much like, well, wow, and we see that. So Genesis 18, verse 4, let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. So he's telling them basically, hey, if you want to stay here with me for a bit, let me go get a little bit of water for you, and go and take a rest under this tree in the shade, away from the heat of the day and the sun and all that's, just the climate there, the shelter under the shade. We see that he's telling God, or he's asking God, basically, hey, you could, if you want to, stay here with me and speak with me. And we know too that God coming to see Abraham in this visit, that he has a message of some sort for him, that he just wanted to come and speak to him personally and talk to his servant and his worshiper, and the one who is the beginning and the genesis of his covenant to be a God of many nations and all these things that take place and transpire, that we see this. He comes to speak directly to Abraham here at this point, also showing that he highly favors Abraham. And and we know a lot of things about Abraham. He was very faithful to his God and what he believed in with his God, that he believed him faithfully, and his faith was accounted to him for righteousness. But he also had a very righteous and good demeanor as well, that, we see it with the way he lived his life, that he was a hardworking man, that, he tended to the flocks and he did all this stuff and that stuff, and he had servants, but he probably did a lot of the stuff that, they would do with the work and whatnot himself as well. And he's probably done it throughout his whole life before he met God when he lived there in Haran. So we just see all these things here, and we know that he considers other people, and he's got care about him. When his servants and the servants of Lot strove and fight together, that basically, he considered the other person before himself. He said, here, choose you whichever land you think is better, and I'll take whatever land that you don't want. Then Lot saw, the what was the good land, that was said to be even in beauty and all these things as the Garden of Eden, that it was so well watered and well favored that it was compared to the Garden of God. And we see this fact, and we just see that he considers other people and what they want too, and he strives to be a peacemaker. There was strife between the herdmen, and he didn't want to be fighting and arguing and bickering with his nephew. So he said, here, the land's too much for both of us. You get to choose, and then whichever way you go, I'll just take wherever. So he stayed where he was because Lot chose the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, right outside of there, that basically chose it because it was, before God destroyed it, the better land. So we see that, and when we see that, we just see Abraham's character, not outright said maybe, but when you really look at the scriptures, it's implied with his demeanor and the character that he showed and portrayed to everyone around him. So, and he was being considerate too, and of course he knows it to be God, but he probably would have done the same thing for other people too that would come up to his camp. He probably would have been very considerate of them, and he would have been the type to help them out if they needed any help. And that's just the type of character and demeanor a man like Abraham has. So Genesis 18, verse 5 says this, "And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort ye your hearts. After that ye shall pass on, for therefore are ye come to your servant. And they said, So do, as thou hast said." So he's wanting to bring them food and just give them something to eat, which something to take into consideration there is, it's implying that they can eat food and stuff like that. Like, it's clearly, from what we would reveal, it's a somewhat mysterious text, but we know that one is as God. And, that's what we know for sure, that he comes to one and he says, Lord. That it's as God, and we know that basically he is offering them food, and then they didn't turn the food down. They didn't say we don't eat or anything like that. So it would seem that they could. And we also know from other texts too that there is what's called angel's food, which is manna, which that word manna basically in the Hebrew tongue means they wist not what it was. They didn't know what it was, so they called it manna because it was just this miraculous stuff that just fell from the sky. And we know it from the words of Paul to be angel's food. So that's just something I wanted to throw in there because it's talking about eating and food and all these things like that. And that's where we're at right here in the scriptures, where he's offering them food and some water and all these things that basically that it implies stuff, and it shows you things through the text that you see as you read. And Genesis chapter 18 verse 6 says this, "And Abraham hastened into the tent unto Sarah, and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth." So, yeah, hearth is kind of like a very old, like way old means of cooking things. That's what they used. It's like an ancient oven, so to speak, where, it's probably a simple stone type design that, they use fire and they just cook up what they can, like a very simple version of it that it gets the job done, that they can make the bread that they need to eat their food and all these things. So it was one of the first forms of, baking, and that's how they made their bread. And, he tells Sarah to start preparing this food and make it for our visitors, because he's showing, and it's being shown to him, that these are the visitors, like they're not just any visitors, but they are, it's God. And and it's a mystery who exactly it is, but we do know that it's God. 3 people there. So Genesis chapter 18 verse 7, "And Abraham ran unto the herd, and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto a young man, and he hasted to dress it." So he goes to one of his servants, and his servant hurries and rushes to go about preparing this food. And that's where we leave off there, that basically, this food's being prepared and it's right there. And we'll see what happens next with the story and all these things as we continue with part 15. So that's the story for today, and you all have a blessed day.